Hello, I'm Benjamin Smith, and I'm here with Bill Driscoll Jr., the current member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives for the 7th Norfolk District. He is also one of the Democratic candidates running for the Massachusetts State Senate for the Norfolk, Bristol, Plymouth District. Currently, that seat is being held by Senator Walter Timilty, who will not be seeking re-election in the fall. As of right now, the primary election date is held for September 3rd. Mr. Driscoll, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So before we get into questions, can you just kind of give us an update of what's been going on at the State House in the past couple of weeks?
Sure. So we just wrapped up the end of our 2-year session in terms of formal sessions. We will go all the way until January of next year before the next class of legislators is sworn in the first week of January. But basically, July 31st is the deadline for anything controversial to be passed. Has to get done by that date. And so we were up there for the last couple of weeks, more sessions than usual, going late into the night. The last day of session went all the way until 10 a.m. the following morning. And basically what's happening is we're playing the deadline and trying to negotiate with the Senate, the House, and the Senate to reach compromise on several bills. And so we were able to do that with a major housing bond package, which will incentivize more housing in Massachusetts, which is a really big issue out there right now on the campaign trail and across the Commonwealth, because the cost of housing has risen so much in Massachusetts. We're such a desirable place to live, including this district. And we are actually in a rare form. We may actually come back into session sometime in the future, because the economic development package that a lot of industry, including life sciences industry and pharma and biotech, which is a real big driver in Greater Boston for jobs, we did not reach a compromise by the 31st date. So there actually may be a special session, which is pretty rare. Outside of the pandemic, when we had formal sessions all year long, most of them were remote or hybrid sessions. Since I've been a legislator, which started in 2017, we've never had a special session after that July 31st date. And the explanation further for that is this is a time when we run for office. So we kind of finish up the 31st. You have about a month, August 1st to, in this case, September 3rd, the day after Labor Day is the primary, where we can go and run for re-election, or run, in this case, for a new seat for that Senate seat.
Excellent. So for anyone watching who doesn't know you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'd be happy to. So my name is Bill Driscoll. I live in Milton. I grew up in Milton. And I've been fortunate it's been a real honor to be a representative for Milton and Randolph for the last number of years. Since 2017, I've represented as state rep Milton and Randolph in the House. And a little bit about myself and my background. My professional background starts as I was graduating college. I went to Boston College, graduated in 2005, and was headed into the film and television industry. So I was trying to work my way up into whatever job I could get. Those jobs lasted a day to 2 weeks, working behind the scenes, trying to meet people, network in the film and television industry here locally, maybe head out to Hollywood someday. And Hurricane Katrina struck in that late summer, the beginning of September in 2005. And I had a window of opportunity where my next gig, so to speak, didn't start for a couple of weeks. So I knew if I could get there, I could do something to help physically. And I actually linked up with a group called All Hands and Heart Smart Response, based in Massachusetts. And they were working in Gulf Coast of Mississippi and intended to go down for 2 weeks. And the work that was so meaningful, we were organized, really making an impact. I ended up staying, kept extending my trip in Mississippi. And ultimately, I stayed for 2 years on the Gulf Coast and actually fell into a career at that point in the nonprofit space, helping communities with cleanup and rebuild, managing volunteers and donated resources after natural disaster events. So 2 weeks turned into 2 years on the Gulf Coast, and then coming out of the Gulf Coast, that same group I went down with, All Hands, offered me a job, and basically spent 11 years prior to the legislature traveling across the country to help communities that were underserved after floods, tornadoes, hurricanes. And it gave me a chance to work on that nonprofit side to help the 10% of the population that really needed extra help recovering from a disaster event, recovering from a flood or a hurricane, piecing together the repair of their home in terms of different social programs, different charity money, insurance money, and helping them get back on their feet. That work gave me exposure to local, state, and federal government, because I had to work with all levels of government to help families recover, find donated resources, find money in grant programs. And that's when the seat opened up in 2016. The House seat in Milton and Randolph opened up, and we had just bought a home recently. My wife, Becca, and I have 2 boys, Robbie, age 5, Will, age 8 now. Will was about 1 year old when I ran the first time around, and I wanted to work closer to home. I had been traveling, like I mentioned, for the better part of a decade around the country. So the prospect of working closer to home for my community and working at the scale of government was really what drew me to the House seat. I'd seen in that nonprofit space, I worked for agencies that had about a $2 million to $4 million a year operating budget. And in 2016, the state operating budget was about $40 billion. It's now almost $60 billion, to give you just to put some numbers on it. So the ability to work at scale of government, where even incremental change in terms of helping people through their everyday life can really go a long way. And that's what drew me to the seat the first time around, and partly why I'm running again now for the Senate seat.
Great. So people who don't know, what is a state senator? What are some of their roles they do?
So state senate, in the total legislature, there's 200 seats. 160 are in the House of Reps, and 40 are in the state senate. And so the district sizes for a House member, like I am now for Milton and Randolph, it's about 42,000 people roughly that I represent, and I'm their voice in the House of Representatives. Senators, it's about 160,000 people, so it's 4 times the district size roughly. And you could represent anywhere from 3 to 20 towns, depending upon out in Western Mass, to make up that 160 person population. And so we, each of us, the House and the Senate and the governor's administration, represent the 3 branches of the state government, and we all have a role to play in passing legislation and policies that affect everyone in the Commonwealth. So typically what will happen is a House member or a senator will file legislation, get that passed in their chamber, and it has to be agreed to or compromised on, worked through with the other side. And so the House and the Senate have to agree to the legislation, and then it goes to the governor for signature, where the governor now, Governor Healy, can either completely agree or send it back with some changes, and we'll consider those and start the process again. And so that's the legislative side. The constituent services side, which is something that I take great pride on in my track record since 2017, is if folks are having individual constituents, homeowners, people that live in the towns that we represent, if they're having an issue with a state agency, as a state rep or a state senator, we're there to help be a liaison and a connection point to go and get information for you. We can escalate cases, whether it's an unemployment case, if you're having trouble accessing funds or getting an answer back whether or not you're eligible, with the Registry of Motor Vehicles, with Department of Revenue, really any state agency, we are a conduit and a connection point for an individual family, and also for the town governments, so the towns or cities that we work within, to help get answers and make sure that the towns or the people that live in each town are being treated fairly.
What standout qualities do you have that would make you a better state senator than your 2 opponents?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think I'm the ideal candidate for this state Senate seat because of my experience in the state legislature so far. So I've served as a House member since 2017, and I've moved up the ranks in the House, first serving as Vice Chair for the Election Laws Committee, and now for the past 2 terms, I've been the chairperson of the Emergency Preparedness and Management Committee. And in that role, I've been tasked with providing oversight from the House side on the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been engaged in the migrant and humanitarian arrivals crisis. And the reason I think this is relevant and why I stand out against the rest of the field for the seat is no matter whether it's a Republican governor or a Democratic governor in that corner office on Beacon Hill, I'm an equal opportunity legislator in terms of we're gonna fight for fairness and hold people accountable. And so you may remember back in 2021 when the vaccine rollout wasn't going so well, and it took in some cases days to register for an appointment. or days to register for a testing appointment. We called the governor and the administration to public hearings, and I led those public hearings on behalf of the House. And so I bring this up because it's an example of I'm pretty new as a legislator, but was made a chairperson and then asked to do the oversight for the biggest health crisis, the biggest thing to face Massachusetts and the country in 100 years. And so I'm a trusted partner with my colleagues on Beacon Hill. And again, it wasn't about scoring political points, whether it was a Republican governor or a Democratic governor in the corner office. It's about being productive, constructive, getting to a point where we're driving towards solutions. And that's the approach that I take as a legislator in an oversight role and in representing my constituents and the cities and towns that I have to partner with and work with to be their voice on Beacon Hill, to get them answers and to push for things that they need, whether it's a budget earmark and having experience in that process, or trying to get answers for a town administrator or a mayor where they're hitting brick walls to do right by their constituents. I have the current relationships with the administration, with the different agencies, and being able to basically hit the ground running. Mm-hmm. So I'm ready to move from the House to the Senate to represent a district that's 4 times the size, and that's really what drives me to run for this position. Is in the same way that I knew if I could get down to Mississippi and help after natural disasters around the country, I know that I can help drive the ball forward for whatever the issue of the day is in a particular town or with a family that's hitting a brick wall with a state agency, so that they're already in my cell phone. We have those relationships up at Beacon Hill now, and so I'd really like to carry it forward and represent more people and ultimately expand work at a bigger scale. Mm.
And if elected senator, what would be one of your top priorities?
So one of the things that I've worked on as state rep, and I'd like to continue working on the Senate side, is as a state rep, I voted for the Student Opportunity Act in 2019, which increased funding to public schools across the Commonwealth. We've all seen the effects of inflation, the rise in the cost of living that's affecting everyone in their wallets, and particularly in the cost to do business in municipalities and pay for education. Ultimately, as a taxpayer and as someone with kids in the public schools, I know firsthand, as many of you do, that we want to be able to rely on our public schools and know that we're doing right by our kids, doing right by our communities, whether our kids are in school now, they will be someday, or if they've gone on to bigger and better things in their lives as they've grown up. It's important that we invest in public schools, and that's something that I've been focused on as a state rep member, the member of the House, and will continue to focus on as I move to the Senate. We made sure that in the state budget this year, we increased the per pupil cost so that there is more money going back from the tax revenue at the state level into our local schools at the public level. And that's something I'm going to continue to try and push for is better investment, more investment in those public schools. We had the Fair Share Amendment passed recently. Was I think the last cycle. It was a ballot question that the voters of Massachusetts passed, and it created a revenue stream that can only go to transportation or education. And this year, in the state budget, that gets worked out every year. The ratio, we did about 60% of that money toward education, and I think that's appropriate right now because, as we're seeing in our cities and towns, the cost just to get to level funding for our schools, for our teachers, and for special education funding, for transportation costs. It's really vital that we kind of keep what we have and then look how we can build upon that, because we don't want to see a diminishment in services. And so I was proud to vote for that higher allocation of that money from the Fair Share Amendment to go toward education. And that's the kind of approach that I will continue to bring in the state Senate.
And you mentioned cost of living. How would you address homelessness and the need for affordable housing in the counties you represent?
I think it's about a couple of things. Incentivizing transit-oriented housing and housing that is workforce housing. So there are workforce challenges across a number of industries in Massachusetts. One of my other priorities is around healthcare and hospitals and making sure that we continue to have the strongest healthcare network in Greater Boston, really in the country. We're known for that here. But that takes folks that are, whether they're pushing a broom, they're working at the bedside as a nurse or a tech, or there are world-renowned doctors and specialists in the hospitals and in primary care positions. It's about workforce, and if you can't live, if you can't afford to live near Boston, near transit-oriented housing to get in and out of work, or supporting a hospital, it's a community hospital, which are really the backbone of a lot of communities. I represent Milton, which has Milton Hospital, which is a major employer for our town. And we need to incentivize the development of transit-oriented housing, because it's going to do a couple of things for us. It's going to get cars off the road and have people use more public transit, so to reduce the congestion. And the cost of living is being so high, we need to incentivize that affordable market rate housing so that we can get people into the jobs they need close by, again, the transit-oriented aspect of it. Another thing that we just voted on in terms of housing and the major housing bond bill that I mentioned before is accessory dwelling units. So this is the idea of what's commonly referred to as the granny flat, or being able to take a portion of your house or add on to your house about up to 900 square feet by right. And this would allow for a couple of things, either to create a unit that can be rented, to create an income stream for a homeowner, maybe someone that's later in life, they can move into the smaller unit, rent the larger part of the house, or do that with family, and providing really an opportunity for a generational wealth transfer in a way that we haven't seen before, and I know in a way that I know a lot of people are worried about. Because the cost of living is rising so high, will generations be able to leave the primary home to a child or family member to live on in the future? And by incentivizing kind of smart growth ADUs in a way that we're doing in this housing bond package, it really provides that opportunity going forward. And I think that these two ways are ways that we can increase units that make sense, that are common sense for our cities and towns. And still, I've been really vocal on preserving that local control, so that the planning board, the select boards, the city councils have a say in how these things are implemented. And so we've now passed that bond bill. It now goes to the administration for them to promulgate the regulations, as they say, and set up how this will be implemented over time, and gives us another opportunity for us to have a voice in how it's implemented in each city and town.
And do you think there's a single most important element to stimulating economic development in this district?
I think it's that our proximity to Boston and creating additional ways for transit-oriented housing to come into effect, I think is really huge. And in workforce housing and smart growth is really the future, because the cost of living, proximity to Boston, I don't see everyone's waiting for the bubble to burst, so to speak, in the housing market. Around Greater Boston, I don't see, even if we do have a bubble, it dropping like we've seen in the past 20 to 40 years. I think those prices are still going to remain high. It's going to drive people further away from Boston, right down 24, right down 138, which is great. I think it's an opportunity for us to build amenities in each town. And so I'll look for ways to support the towns as they want to grow and bring in more amenities that will ultimately bring in more folks to town. And also, again, the public education piece is huge. I've seen it firsthand in the district that I represent now in the House, Milton and Randolph. When I first got into office in 2017, it was pretty easy to see that folks are moving to Milton because of the schools and not even looking at Randolph because of their schools. Their school district was ranked pretty low in terms of a 1 to 5, 1 being you have the best schools in the world, 5 being you're in receivership, your district can't handle its own business. Randolph was ranked at a 4. It wasn't fair. They actually had schools that were ranked 2s and 3s, and the school committee brought this to me right away when I was elected and said, can you help us figure this out? We haven't been able to right-size our ranking, and it's really affecting the town because people are leaving the town because they're misunderstanding what's going on here, or they're not even looking at it as an option to move into. And so I sat down with the Secretary of Education, with the Department of Ed, and said, I'm not a math major, but how are we ranked a 4 in Randolph if our schools are ranked 2s and 3s? The average doesn't get to a 4. So we worked with the Secretary of Education and DESE and made sure that Randolph was right-sized so that they had the appropriate ranking and that they were level set. They can always go backwards, but we made sure that Randolph got a fair shake going forward, because it's really, really important that folks know that they can trust their public school systems, whether you're here or anywhere else in Massachusetts. And again, that's something that I have been doing every day since 2017 as a state rep, and hope to bring to the Senate, which is to listen to local elected officials, the local community members, the advocacy groups, and be that voice for them on Beacon Hill, whether it's with the administration or the House and the Senate, to make sure that they're getting a fair shake and the results that they deserve.
And if elected, what will you do at the state level to provide assistance with citizens with disabilities?
So the Citizens with Disabilities community is alive and well in Beacon Hill. We meet with them regularly. I always have an open door policy for folks that want to come and talk to me about the issues they're facing. And I'll continue to do that in the Senate if I'm elected on the primary, September 3rd, the day after Labor Day. And so it's about investment in projects, making sure that projects are accessible. I can give you one example in Milton, which is, again, a town I represent now as a state rep. We received and secured investment of up to over $118 million. So we've got $118 million available to us now with the MBTA and through the state to do upgrades at the T stations that are in Milton. And this has been something that we've been working on for a number of years. And there's a project about to start where we're making for the first time an ADA accessible entrance to Milton Station. This is a really big deal because it's partly going across public land and private land to get to the station. There was a staircase that was taken down, and we made sure that we're going to have an entrance to the station from a major street in Milton, which right now it's been lacking for the last year and a half. But it's going to be ADA accessible, and in the iteration of the future stations along that line, of which there are 6, we're working with the T to make sure as they update those stations, they're all ADA accessible from all directions. And again, listening to local constituents that use this line or can't use this line today in Milton because of the lack of access or safe access. We're holding the T accountable and making sure that they're building these types of entrances or elevators into their plans going forward.
Great. And how do you plan to assist small businesses in the area?
So small businesses, we hear from a lot in the district, and one way that I can give you an example of how I've assisted them as a state rep through the local earmark process and supporting growth, for example, in East Milton Square or in Randolph as well with tree planting. It sounds like a small thing, but we want people to come to the city centers, the commerce areas and towns, and I've secured earmarks in both Randolph and Milton to help provide for better sidewalks, better, safer pedestrian crossings, so that people can trust that their kids are going to be safe crossing the street to get to a local restaurant or a local store as they're going to school. And so it's about building that infrastructure, and I think that's really where government plays a big role. Is making sure that no matter what town you live in, that there's tax dollars that are getting back to local projects that support the infrastructure around small business. And so that we are propping up small business, giving them an opportunity to succeed, setting up them for success. And I'll continue to work with cities and towns to secure those earmarks, or to go after, if it's a home rule petition or other things that they want to pass that could support their local districts. I'm happy to work and partner with local cities and towns to do that.
Very nice. And are there which specific actions would you take to address climate change?
Oh, climate change, great question. So this is something I've been working on for a while in the elected space, and I've actually filed a bill. It's called the Green Future Act. It has a lot of support. It's been filed for a number of sessions now. And at one point we had, I think, over 100 co-sponsors in terms of senators and state representatives that had signed on to support it. It's been filed now so many times that we've actually been able to break off pieces of it. It's a pretty comprehensive bill. And they've either been passed in the legislature or they've been implemented by an administration under the executive order process. And specifically, I can talk to this question about how we would address it is, if passed, this bill would create a revenue stream around carbon pricing to go after the kind of the biggest polluters in Massachusetts, puts a price on carbon in terms of emissions. And so even if you do this at a minimal level, you create billions of dollars that could then be used to install and implement electric car charging stations, could be used to incentivize and help build, whether it's public buildings or housing that have clean energy and are ready to receive clean energy for modernizing the grid. And this is something I hope to continue to work on. One of the aspects that we've pulled out of this as well is a clean heat standard. So it's incentivizing a move toward the mini splits and heat pumps and away from the reliance on fossil fuels as the primary cooling or heating device for homes. Because what we've seen over the last 30 years since we started to do some of this carbon pricing in the generation sector, so the way that we get home energy delivered to our houses has been under a carbon pricing scheme since the mid-90s. We're actually producing more energy, we're using more fossil fuels to get energy to our homes, but the emissions have dropped substantially. Wow. And so what we'd like to do is to try and implement this in other sectors in the Commonwealth so that we can see that reduction in emissions into our atmosphere, but also create a revenue stream to help with the transition to a cleaner energy future. And I think it's something that is obviously possible. We're doing it in bite-sized pieces right now. So we've set a climate roadmap up that has checkpoints at 2030, 2035, and 2050. In order to meet those goals at the later end of that roadmap, we're really going to need to do something like this where we're creating a big revenue source for cities and towns or regional groups to tap into to pay for their clean infrastructure projects. Because we'd like to send money. I think the answer is create that revenue source, send it back to cities and towns, talk to their neighbors, figure out what they can do together, and that'll speed things up in terms of as we make this transition. And so I think there's a real opportunity there, and I'm hopeful that moving to the Senate we can make some more headway on it.
Great. And what is that you've learned from young people on your campaign trail, and what issues matter to them?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think that what I've heard a lot from young people is the cost of living, the cost of rent in terms of whether they're a student or they're recently joining the workforce. And they're concerned that they're not, in the same way that their parents are, concerned that they're not going to be able to live in the same town or in proximity to where they've grown up in southeastern Massachusetts because of the increase in cost of living and rent. And there's a real push for what's commonly referred to as rent control. And I think that we have to be careful exactly how that's implemented if we do move to that space. But one of the things that I did support in terms of this particularly, whether it's housing and the issues with young people, is I supported an amendment for the housing bond bill. It ultimately did not get adopted yet, but I'm hopeful in the future that we'd be able to set up an office. In this case, it would be through the AG's office. It would be an ombudsman for housing. So it'd be a place where if someone's rent was increasing exponentially, 10% or higher for that next lease, that next contract, they could go to this office, whether it's at the AG's office or somewhere else, ultimately, and have kind of a hearing, an arbitration hearing to say, improvements haven't been made on this property, and we don't think that this is a fair increase for the next cycle, for the next lease. And there's also the potential to put in those benchmarks so that rents can't go up more than 5% or 10% or higher in a given year or a series of years in a lease. So I think that I'm very open-minded about what might be done. The other side of this is that if you do implement cost control, rent control, it can lead to underinvestment in properties, in rentals, and actually a decrease in this housing stock. And so we have to find that balance. And so we're talking to advocates on both sides, whether it's the real estate industry or folks in the advocacy space that really want to see cost controls put into place. And I use this as an example too, because I think this is an example of my approach. Trying to take a balanced, thoughtful, forward-thinking approach to the issues that are facing young people or seniors in our communities, and getting all the information, having the tough conversations with the different parties, and trying to find that common ground going forward so that we can improve things for folks and make sure that if folks want to stay here, as they grow older, they can.
Great. We just have a couple more questions left.
Sure.
Easy ones. What would you like voters to know about you before September 3rd?
Or I like to know about me before September 3rd. So I've been engaged as the state rep since 2017 for Milton and Randolph. I really think it gives me the right experience and the right tone to come in. Knowing that I have relationships in the House. I've been a chairperson of a joint committee with the Senate, which means that I've worked with Senate staff and with Senate members to get things done. And I've always been constructive and productive with my conversations, taking that balanced, forward-thinking approach on the issues. And on the personal side, I've got 2 boys. Robbie's age 5, Will is age 8. So we're playing, soccer and baseball on the weekends. I got pulled in to be an assistant coach for the first time this year, which made it interesting with the early part of the campaign. But it was a ton of fun, and I look forward to doing that in the years ahead with the boys and with the community. And so it's something that we've really cherished our time. And again, it's just amazing to see, particularly in this area, like how strong the baseball is. When I've been in Braintree is one of the other towns that I would represent if elected on September 3rd. And there's a big rivalry there with baseball. So sometimes I have to be careful what I'm talking about in the communities. But it's all been good fun, and I look forward to continuing that in the future.
Great. And if people wanted to know more about your campaign, where could they go to learn more?
Yeah, so to learn more about the campaign, we have a website, which is vote4driscoll.com, the number 4, so it's vote, the number 4driscoll.com. We're on Facebook at the same thing, Vote for Driscoll. I'm on Twitter at Vote for Driscoll. But that website's going to be the best place to go. And please reach out if you have questions, and be happy to answer them.
Great. Before we leave, is there any closing remarks you would like to make?
I'd absolutely like to make some closing remarks. So the primary is the day after Labor Day, September 3rd. We're out there every day in the communities, meeting people, knocking on doors, and what I'll bring to the State House is the same energy that I've brought as a state rep since 2017 for Milton and Randolph, which is I want to be your voice on Beacon Hill. I've made a career previously to being elected in the nonprofit space, helping communities affected by natural disasters, managing volunteers, managing donated resources to get things done, working with all levels of government from local, state, and federal on up. And I've been a difference maker in that space for folks, and I've prided myself on the work that we've done in the State House so far as a state rep to help people navigate state agencies, being their liaison to get them answers or get them results, whether it's on an unemployment claim, work with the RMV or another state agency, and then being a partner with local cities and towns in terms of if they have a home rule petition that they want to see passed, I am their delegate at the State House to make sure that we get that effectively done for them at the State House, and to work with cities and towns to make sure that they're getting a fair shake as policies are implemented around housing, transportation, or otherwise. And so I'm that effective partner. I have that experience. I'm the only one in this race that has experience as a state lawmaker, and I'd like to continue doing that work for you in the State Senate.
Well, Mr. Driscoll, thank you for coming down and answering our questions. It was great having you. We wish you the best of luck in your campaign.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.